I never thought I'd find myself in such a situation at 35. The last 7 years of marriage to Mary seemed, if not perfect, then quite happy. But often in life, everything crumbles gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you wake up in a cold bed and realize something has irreversibly broken. "Alex, are you staying late again today?" Mary's voice on the phone sounded tired and irritated at the same time. "Yes, honey. The project is urgent, you understand." "I don't understand anything anymore. It's been the same thing for 3 months. Even on weekends, you're either working or so exhausted you just lie on the couch." She was right. Work at the architectural firm was indeed exhausting me, but that was only half the truth. The other half was that I simply didn't know what to talk about with my own wife. It was as if a glass wall had grown between us. Everything seems visible, but untouchable. In the evening, driving up to the house, I noticed a familiar car. Katherine, my mother-in-law, had come to visit us again. Lately, she'd been visiting often, sensing something wrong in her daughter's and son-in-law's relationship. Strangely, her presence didn't bother me, as it usually does with mothers-in-law and jokes. Entering the house, I heard muffled voices from the kitchen. "Mary, darling, you need to talk. You can't live like this." "Mom, I've tried. He just closes up. I don't recognize him anymore." I froze in the hallway, hesitating to enter. Katherine had always been a perceptive woman. At 50, she had retained not only her sharp mind, but also her attractive appearance. I often caught myself thinking that she looked like a more mature version of my wife, but with some special, refined grace. "Alex, you're home already?" Katherine's voice interrupted my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. Her brown eyes looked at me with understanding and some hidden sadness. "Yes, just came in." I tried to smile, but it came out unconvincing. "Mary, lay down. She got a headache." Katherine came closer. "Would you like some tea? You look exhausted." That evening we had our first real conversation. Katherine knew how to listen without judging. She asked the right questions and seemed to genuinely want to understand what was happening in my head and soul. I told her about the crushing responsibility at work, about feeling lost in my own marriage, about the fear of destroying everything with one wrong word. "You know, Alex," she said when the clock showed well past midnight, "sometimes we all find ourselves at a crossroads. The important thing is not to stay there too long." I watched her getting ready to go home, how carefully she wrapped her scarf around her neck and felt a strange warmth inside. For the first time in a long while, someone had really heard me. "Thank you, Katherine," I said quietly, walking her to her car. "You're welcome." She smiled softly and momentarily touched my hand. "Call if you want to talk. I'm always available." Returning to the house, I stood at the window for a long time, watching her car's taillights disappear. Something changed that evening. I just didn't understand what exactly yet. The next few weeks flew by in a fog. Mary was staying late at work more often, and when she returned home, she went straight to the bedroom. We almost stopped having dinner together. In rare moments of communication, every conversation turned into a silent torture or ended in an argument. "Maybe we should see a family therapist," I suggested one evening. "Seriously, Alex? Only now you thought of that." Mary didn't even look up from her phone. "I suggested this a month ago, but you were too busy with your projects." That evening I couldn't take it anymore and called Katherine. I don't even know why I called her specifically. "Alex, did something happen?" Her voice sounded concerned. "No, well, yes, I don't know. Can I come over? Just to talk." Half an hour later, I was sitting in her kitchen. Katherine silently put a glass of whiskey in front of me and sat across from me. "I'm ruining everything, Katherine, everything I touch." "Don't talk nonsense." She lightly touched my hand. "You're just confused. It happens." That evening we talked for hours. She told me about her divorce, about how hard it was raising Mary alone, about her mistakes and regrets. I had never seen her so human. "You know what's the hardest part?" she asked, pouring me more whiskey. "Admitting that sometimes we can't control everything. Sometimes we need to just let go." Her hair had a golden sheen in the desk lamp's light. I caught myself staring too long at the elegant curve of her neck. Such evenings began to repeat. First once a week, then more often. We talked about everything: work, books, music. Sometimes we just sat in silence, and that silence was comfortable. Katherine understood me without words, as if reading my thoughts. "You've been staying late more often." Mary noticed one day. There was a strange mix of indifference and suspicion in her voice. Work, I lied, feeling my throat constrict treacherously. Of course, she smirked. You know, Mom says you stop by sometimes, to talk. I froze. Yes, she helps me figure out some things. Funny, you don't want to talk to me, but with her, no problem. At that moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but not because of the meetings with Katherine, because these meetings had started to mean more to me than they should have. One evening, as Katherine and I sat in her living room, she suddenly asked, "Are you in love with my daughter, Alex?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I used to be sure I was. And now, I looked at her. In the dim light, her eyes seemed like dark pools, pulling me deeper. Now I'm not sure of anything, I answered honestly. She moved closer, supposedly to fix a fallen pillow. Her hand accidentally touched my knee and a shiver ran through my body. I think I'm starting to understand what the problem is, she said quietly, not moving away. At that moment, we both knew we were crossing some invisible line, but neither of us found the strength to stop. After that evening, something subtly changed. Every meeting with Katherine turned into a complex game of glances, accidental touches, and unspoken phrases. We both understood that something wrong was happening, but we continued to meet, inventing new reasons. Alex, could you help Mom with her computer? Mary asked one day. She says something's broken. I felt my pulse quicken. Of course, I'll stop by after work. You've become such an attentive son-in-law. There was irony in her voice. Katherine's house smelled of fresh baking. She opened the door wearing a house dress that beautifully accentuated her figure. The computer really is acting up, she said, leading me to the study, but I could have called a technician. Why? You have me. Our eyes met. In hers, I saw the same confusion that was torturing me. I leaned over the computer, trying to concentrate on work, but I could feel her presence behind me. She bent down, supposedly looking at the screen, her hair brushing against my cheek. Katherine, my voice sounded hoarse. Yes? She didn't move away. We shouldn't. I know. She straightened up. Sorry, I'll make coffee. Over coffee, we talked about trivial things, carefully avoiding looking at each other. But when our hands accidentally touched over the sugar bowl, the air seemed to become electrified. How are you and Mary? She asked, looking away. The same, maybe even worse. I fidgeted with my cup. She suggested living separately, said we need a break. Katherine sharply raised her head. And what did you say? That I'd think about it. What else could I say? She stood up and went to the window. The setting sun painted her silhouette in golden tones. Did you know I divorced Mary's father because of another woman? She suddenly said. Or rather, he left for another woman. And I swore to myself that never... She didn't finish the sentence. I stood up and approached her. Katherine, I don't want to hurt Mary, or you. And yourself, she turned to me. Aren't you already hurting yourself? At that moment, we stood so close that I could feel the warmth of her body. Her eyes were full of the same struggle that was tearing me apart inside. I should go, I said, taking a step back. Yes, you should. She nodded but didn't move. At the doorstep, she suddenly grabbed my hand. Alex, I don't want to be the reason. You're not the reason, I interrupted her. You're the consequence. The whole way home, I thought about what we were doing, about how wrong it was, what I felt for my wife's mother, about how badly I wanted to go back and finish what had started happening between us. At home, Mary met me with news. I booked tickets to Chicago. For a week, I need to think. I nodded, feeling a strange relief, and immediately, a wave of shame for this feeling. Mom will look after you, she added with a strange intonation. She always has. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time, remembering Katherine's look, her touches, the scent of her perfume. I knew we were balancing on the edge of an abyss, and the scariest part was I wasn't sure I wanted to keep from falling. Mary left on Monday morning. I drove her to the airport. We awkwardly hugged goodbye. In her eyes, I saw a mixture of sadness and determination. Take care of yourself, yes, she said, and think about everything. I nodded, watching her pass through security. Somewhere inside, guilt stirred. I already knew I wouldn't be going straight home. Katherine opened the door as if she'd been waiting for me. Did you see her off? Yes. I stepped over the threshold, feeling my heart pounding against my ribs. Coffee? No. We stood in the hallway, looking at each other. Everything that had held us back before was crumbling like a house of cards. Alex! Her voice trembled. We shouldn't... I stepped forward, she stepped back, her back against the wall. Her breathing quickened, pupils dilated. "I know," I whispered, leaning towards her lips. What happened next was like an earthquake, just as inevitable and destructive. Her lips were soft with a taste of morning coffee. Her hands slid along my back, pulling me closer. We kissed like teenagers, hungrily, desperately, forgetting everything. "Wait," she pulled away, breathing heavily. Let's at least go to the living room." In the living room, everything repeated with new force. Her skin smelled of jasmine, hair scattered across her shoulders. Every touch was like an electric shock. We didn't speak. Afraid words would break the moment, make us come to our senses. Everything happened naturally, hot, passionate, on the verge of madness. The couch, the blanket, ragged breathing, whispers. Reality dissolved in a whirlpool of sensations. Afterward, we lay silent, staring at the ceiling. She spoke first. "What have we done, Alex?" I didn't answer. What could be said? "She'll never forgive us." There was bitterness in her voice. "I know." We dressed in silence, avoiding looking at each other. Everything that had happened now seemed unreal, like a dream or a delusion. "Maybe we should," I began. "No," she shook her head. "Let's not decide anything now. Just please leave." At the door, she suddenly grabbed my hand. "Alex, it was a mistake." I looked into her eyes. I was going to say beautiful, and that makes it even more terrifying. The whole way home, I was shaking. Memories of what happened came in waves. Her scent, the taste of her lips, touches. And then, a suffocating sense of guilt. At home, I first thing jumped in the shower as if hoping to wash away what had happened. But even hot water couldn't calm the trembling inside. My phone was ringing off the hook work, trivial matters. Everything seemed so insignificant. In the evening, a message came from Mary. "Landed. Hope you're okay." I sat with this message for an hour, not knowing how to respond. How do you say okay after what I'd done? How could I ever look her in the eyes again? There were no messages from Katherine. I knew she was going through the same thing now. A mixture of ecstasy and self-loathing, happiness and shame. We had crossed a line from which there was no return. And the scariest part, I couldn't make myself regret it. I spent the next 3 days in a fog. I made mistakes at work, couldn't find peace at home. The phone was silent. No messages from Mary or Katherine. The silence pressed on my temples, making me replay what had happened over and over again. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore and called Katherine. "We need to talk," I said when she finally answered. "No, Alex, we don't." "Katherine, please." "I can't, not now." Her voice trembled. "Mary called me yesterday, asked if you were okay. God, Alex, I could barely speak to her." "I'm coming over." "No." But an hour later, I was already at her door. She opened haggard with red eyes. "Why did you come?" "Because I'm going crazy," I answered honestly. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. About us." She stepped back, letting me into the house. We went to the kitchen, where everything had started with innocent conversations over coffee. "I haven't slept for 3 nights, she said, sitting across from me. "Kept thinking, how did we get to this? Where did we go wrong? Maybe when we started lying to ourselves that these were just conversations." She laughed bitterly. "Probably. You know what's the worst part? I don't regret it. I mean, I hate myself for this, but I don't regret it." I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "No, Alex, we can't. We shouldn't." "And what should we do? Pretend nothing happened?" "Yes!" she almost shouted. "That's exactly what we should do, for Mary's sake." At that moment, her phone rang. Mary's name appeared on the screen. Katherine went pale. "Hi, darling." Her voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "Yes, everything's fine. Alex? No, I haven't seen him today. Of course I'll look after him." Each lie was like a knife stab. I could see her suffering, see her hands trembling. "She's coming back the day after tomorrow," Katherine said, hanging up. "Says she misses us." "What are we going to do?" "Nothing. Just go on living, like nothing happened." "What if I can't?" She stood up and went to the window. "You can, Alex. We both can. Because the alternative, it will destroy all of us." "We've already destroyed everything." "No. As long as no one knows, not everything is lost." I came up behind her, inhaled the familiar scent of her hair. She shuddered but didn't move away. "Katherine." "Leave!" Her voice sounded hollow. "Please, just leave!" This time I obeyed. At the door, I turned around. She was still standing there, by the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I love you," I said. She didn't answer. Only when I was already closing the door, I heard a quiet, "I know." At home, I opened a bottle of whiskey. My phone beeped, a message from Mary. "Missing you. Coming back Wednesday. Will you meet me?" I stared at the screen until the letters blurred before my eyes. How would I meet her? How would I look her in the eyes? How would I live on, knowing that a few miles away from us, her mother was experiencing the same despair? The whiskey didn't help. Nothing helped ease this pain, a strange mixture of guilt, love, and despair. Katherine and I were like two halves of one broken heart, and now we had to learn to live with these shards inside. The airport was crowded. I watched the arrival board, nervously clutching a bouquet, a pitiful attempt at atonement. Mary's flight was delayed by 30 minutes, and each minute of waiting was torture. My phone vibrated. A message from Katherine. She wrote that the plane has landed. Take care of her. I didn't respond. For the past 2 days, we hadn't communicated. A silent agreement to pretend nothing had happened. But her presence in my life felt like phantom pain. "Alex!" I turned around. Mary was walking towards me through the hall, thinner, tanned with some new determination in her look. I stepped forward, extending the flowers. "Did you miss me?" She smiled, accepting the bouquet. "Very much. I didn't lie. I really did miss her, miss that simple life we had before. We need to talk," she said in the car. My heart skipped a beat. "About what?" "About us. About what's happening." She turned to me. "You know, this week, it clarified a lot of things." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, preparing for the worst. "I realized I don't want to lose you, Alex. Yes, we have problems. Yes, we've grown distant, but maybe we can try to fix everything?" I felt a lump rising in my throat. Her words were like a knife to my heart. She wanted to fight for our marriage, not knowing I had already betrayed her in the worst possible way. "Of course," I managed. "Of course we'll try. Mom says you stopped by a couple of times," she mentioned casually. "Says you talked a lot." I almost missed a turn. "Yes, she helped me understand some things." "She's always been wise," Mary smiled. "You know, I'm so glad you get along. Many of my friends complain about their relationships with mothers-in-law, but we—" She kept talking while I felt each of her words driving a nail into the coffin of my relationship with Katherine. At home, Mary's first action was to call her mother. "Mom, come over for dinner. I brought you souvenirs." I went out to the balcony, unable to listen to this conversation. In an hour, Katherine would be here. We would sit at the same table, smile, pretend everything was normal. And inside, a black hole of guilt and unspoken feelings would keep growing. Katherine arrived exactly on time. She wore the same dress I had last seen her in. Our eyes met for a split second and immediately darted away. "How was your flight, darling?" She hugged her daughter. "Great! You know, this trip, it changed a lot. Alex and I decided to work on our relationship." I saw Katherine's hand trembling as she held her glass. The dinner turned into an exquisite torture. Every gesture, every glance could give us away. We carefully avoided looking at each other, but I could feel her presence with every fiber of my being. "Maybe we could go somewhere for the weekend," Mary suggested. "All together, like old times." I can't," Katherine said quickly. "I have plans." "What plans?" I'm thinking of moving." Mary and I stared at her. "Moving? Where? Why?" Mary looked bewildered. "To Seattle. I was offered a job, and I think it's time for a change in my life." I understood what she was doing. She was making the decision for both of us. "But Mom, you can't just leave!" "I can, darling, and I must—" Later, when Mary went out for dessert, we were alone for a moment. "Seattle?" I asked quietly. "It's better this way, for everyone." "What if I—" "No, Alex, no what-ifs. You have a chance to fix everything. Don't waste it." I watched her drive away, understanding that she was right. We couldn't be together without destroying everything around us. But we also couldn't be apart without destroying ourselves. Mary hugged me from behind. "Strange, isn't it? Mom's always been nearby, and now—" I hugged her back, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. An unread message from Katherine glowed on my phone. "Take care of her and yourself. Goodbye." I didn't respond. What could I possibly say? Sometimes love isn't a beautiful story with a happy ending. Sometimes it's just a long road of guilt that must be walked alone. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.